Morning, everyone. Hope you are doing well. It's always odd that I can see with my screens how, like, me starting the stream, going on the video, and then when I push start on YouTube itself, there's this odd little delay. So I see, a few instances of me getting ready for the stream to go live, going like this. And like looking at stuff, and so it's odd that every time these things start, I'm just sitting here like looking like I didn't know what was going on, or I'm surprised that I'm online. Um, all right, so we're talking about practicing the presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Um, and thankfully, even though there's not really, well, there are chapters, and it's not as if it was meant to be discussed in 4 parts. However, I find that it easily breaks into 4 parts. And so we're discussing the second section, which are the letters of Brother Lawrence. These are correspondences from him to others. We don't get the second half of the conversation. We only get the one-way conversation. But that's fine. I don't feel that we really need all the backstory to really get something out of it. Let me see if I can prop this up. Because I'm sure many of you are really excited to see the smoke alarm. All right. And today's meditation won't be super long. Mostly because I think that, well, we'll see. I find, having read the letters section, pages 31 through 60, and thinking about them for some time, that Brother Lawrence, he and I feel of the same mind on a few things, and it has to do with mindfulness, intentionality. I've preached on this before, a few times probably, but it is something that I feel strongly about, and that practice is a great boon to me, and I think is a very effective way of helping me do the kinds of things I expect a Christian to do. And that's not, when I say things that I expect a Christian to do, I don't mean that to say things a Christian should do. It is very much laden with my own biases, assumptions, presumptions, things that I feel that I should be doing as a Christian. And again, that is for me. What you feel that you may be doing or must be doing or should be doing as a Christian is your own individual experience, your own journey, your own fingerprint. And so when I speak in those terms about, what I feel a Christian should be doing, that is not a prescription for what you necessarily have to or must be doing. It's not a qualifying element. It's mostly just me talking about how I feel that I relate to God, relate to Christ, and my own hang-ups and my own expectations of myself. Not that those are required elements. Those are just my own expectations. But yes, I find that to live up to my own idea of what Andrew McClarty is as a Christian, I think intentionality and mindfulness and that sort of active yet inactive tension is the best way for me to get about doing that. I guess long story, to make a very long and babbling point very concise, mindfulness, or what Brother Lawrence kind of really is getting at, is practicing the presence of God, is, I find, the best way for me to live my life and walk my journey of faith. Let me explain a little better. On page 34 in this edition, Brother Lawrence talks about, for the first year I commonly employed myself during the time set apart for devotion with the thought of death, judgment, heaven, hell, and my sins. Side note, Brother Lawrence basically felt that he was in no way redeemable and a very sinful person prior to taking on a religious life. He was kind of outside of the church, I guess living a rambunctious life, and at the age of 18 had a conversion experience. I continued for some years, applying my mind carefully to the rest of the day, even in the midst of my business, to the presence of God. I continued for some years, applying my mind carefully for the rest of the day, even in the midst of my busyness, to the presence of God, whom I considered always as with me, often as in me. And this is a sentiment that he has expressed in earlier pages, or I guess was expressed on his behalf in earlier pages. Finding God in the common and the ordinary, the famous example of seeing that bear. Excuse me. When I start talking this early in the morning, I need to flex my muscles, so I end up yawning as a flexing exercise. Yes, so his conversion experience was seeing a tree in the dead of winter, but knowing that so much would happen, and so much of how that tree appeared and would transform come spring. With the springtime came a radical transformation for this seemingly dead tree. And when he reflected upon that, he realized that so much could come, so much transformative power could come for him in due season. And so that is what got him toward the religious life at the age of 18. But that moment is being mindful of God's presence in the seeing the tree in winter, or reflecting on your life and God in the car one day. I was present with God yesterday when I was looking after my daughter Waverly, and she desperately wanted to go in the backyard and play hide and seek, and so we did. And the giggle on her when I was chasing after her when we were playing tag, just the sheer giggle of her running away from me, trying not to get tagged, God was right there with us. God was in that moment in every way you could describe. And that's not that God suddenly came into the moment. It's to remember that God is in all these moments, in this moment right now. It's a matter of me being present enough and mindful enough to be aware of that, and then to take comfort from that. He continues on a later page, that my most useful method is this simple attention and such a general passionate regard to God, whom I find myself often attached with greater sweetness and delight than that of an infant at the mother's breast. As for my set hours of prayer, there are only a continuation of that same exercise. Sometimes I consider myself as a stone before a carver, whereof he is to make me a statue, presenting myself thus before God. I desire him to form his perfect image in my soul, and to make me entirely like himself. I have found recently that I can start, when I'm trying to be present with God and understanding the movements in my life or in my day or in my week that would help me follow God's path for me. And I find that I spend so much time thinking about that journey and thinking about God, or thinking about, I feel God's calling me towards this project right now, or getting this thing off the ground over here, that I will focus so much on how to do that or how to plan for that, that I'm really I move past a point of being intentional and working toward God's will, and instead am really just getting this project worked on or getting this project off the ground over here, using that resource gathering or that information gathering or the whatever the planning stages are for that, using those as excuses to ignore this element over here or this element over here. So I can very much start focusing on a project or a task, and I get so involved in that task that I know that I'm really just over planning or over thinking about the planning, to where I'm not even starting the project. I'm really just sort of navel gazing at this point, because I either I have a fear of starting a project and really doing it. I sit comfortably in the planning stages and never start the execution stage. I think part of that has to do with a fear of failure, but I also think part of that has to do with using it as a reason to maybe ignore other parts that I find less intriguing or electrifying, or maybe just a way to overlook the mundane and kind of sweep it under the rug until the next day. And some of that's fine and healthy. We're not going to always perfectly balance the heavier weighted and the lighter weighted aspects of our day. Sometimes our responsibilities get pushed back to the next day. That's fine. But when you're doing it as an avoidance tactic, then you need to be honest with God, and as Brother Lawrence keeps telling us, just bear yourself fully over toward God. Make yourself like a stone before a carver, where God makes perfect your soul. Brother Lawrence speaks about our inactivity, I should say, in these moments of prayer, which in the monastic life you set aside times of just prayer, where that is your focus and your intention, to the point of trying your best to not think about other things. Not my strongest suit. But he's talking about how sometimes in prayer, in contemplation, in meditation, that the soul feels like it is being lofted and held up high, that it is weightless, and that you feel this joy, being surrounded in joy. And he says of that experience, I know that some charge this state with inactivity, delusion, and self-love. I confess that it is a holy inactivity, and would be a happy self-love if the soul in that state were capable of it, because in effect, while she is in repose, she cannot be disturbed by such acts as she was formerly accustomed to, and which were then her support, but which would now rather hinder than assist her. And I'm not entirely clear on his point, but I really did just grab onto this idea of holy inactivity. I'm not entirely sure if he is speaking in favor of it or speaking against it. But I do believe there is holy inactivity, especially because we are a very active generation. We are a very active people. And so, anyway, I just really grabbed on. I'm going to grab onto that idea of holy inactivity. If sometimes someone is a little much too absent from the divine presence, God presently makes himself to be felt in the soul to recall him, which often happens when he is most engaged in his outward business. He's talking about a fellow monk of his. God will make himself, God will make it herself known in your business. That is true. And then a final thought I had in the 12th letter, which is page 55. If we were well accustomed to the exercise of the presence of God, all bodily diseases would be much alleviated thereby. God often permits that we should suffer a little to purify our souls and oblige us to continue with him. Now, I want to speak to this. This is a very 17th century school of thought. This is Brother Lawrence, a man of his times. I don't agree with that. And yet there can be wisdom gleaned from this. In that let me back up. Prayer is not a substitute for medicine or doctors or vaccines or a cast to set a broken limb. And yet, even after doctor's intervention and medicines and all those things, there are times when we are still sick, times when we are still left ill, times when we will carry those limps or hindrances or disabilities or what have you. We will. There are times we will carry the scars and the after effects of our illnesses for the rest of our living days. There are also illnesses from where we're just not going to get better, and we are going to decline until we get into the greater life with Christ. And there are times when we are left with the aftermath of an illness, where the only place we can turn is God and our faith. So while I don't want to read this passage and think faith is our doctor, faith will cure our disease and just make us better. I'm not saying God can't do that. I'm just saying that's not how I have experienced God to work. And so I'm not going to start asking that test of faith. If someone were to say to me, if I have enough faith, God will cure my disease, I think that's an awful, terrible test of God, which we are specifically told not to do. We're not going to be jumping off any temples so that angels can catch us, and at least lest we dash our foot against a stone. I'm not putting God to that test. And it's irresponsible of people to try to test God in that way. That said, in the aftermath of illness, or when we're convalescing in bed, it is quite good and natural and lovely to have our thoughts turn to God. we can become more contemplative as we, recover or are bedridden. We become really good prayers at that point. I know a lot of people, especially in their elder years, may lament a less. They may get depressed because they're less productive because either they are retired and are trying to get accustomed to that new role of not going out to the job force, the workforce, or they will, because they're not being productive in society, that they're feeling useless. And yet, even if you're just retired, or if you are old and kind of losing your faculties, or not old, if you are in declining health and losing your faculties, that is a great time to become a giver of prayer. Pray for the world. Pray for those around you. Pray for those you do not know. That is an incredible gift you can give. And in being more attentive to the presence of God as you go throughout your day, I think this is where passages like this can be very helpful. Very helpful. And in giving over yourself fully to God, as Brother Lawrence has repeatedly talked about, you are giving that pain over to God and asking for help in dealing with it. Asking for help and for alleviation is great. Asking for a cure is fine. I just don't think that's how God works. But pray still, nonetheless. I still pray for my friends who are sick. I've got a friend named I have a friend who's battling cancer right now. I pray for her to be cured all the time. But also I know that she's going through her regimen, so with the doctors, so that's also good too. I pray for the skill and the hands of the medical professionals. All right, well, those are my thoughts, at least right now, from the section of letters. I really do get a lot out of how the practicing the presence of God really is mindfulness, really is this intentionality. I really appreciate it. I wish I had encountered this book years ago when I was trying to explain to people why meditation wasn't anti-Christian, or why reading a book about mindfulness that had been made very popular by a Buddhist monk wasn't blasphemy, because meditation, contemplation, mysticism, mindfulness has been a part of the Christian tradition for hundreds and hundreds of years. And the earliest church fathers were mystics or ascetics doing this kind of stuff in the desert. So anyway, that's my soapbox. Y'all be well. I will see y'all on Sunday and on Compline on Thursday. God bless.